What's up, YouTube? I'm here to do my prediction video for UFC Fight Night Gane versus Volkov, I mean. Let's start them on. The first fight is Yancy Medeiros versus Damir Hazard. To me, I think that these guys are pretty similar. I think Damir's probably a slightly stronger wrestler, but I think Yancy's takedown defense is good enough to prevent any takedowns. I think both guys like to strike, and I think that's where it's going to stay for the most part. I do favor Yancy a little bit. I think he's got the height and reach. And I think the time off for him has probably been good. I think he's probably healed up all the injuries he's had. I think he's younger, a little bit faster, and just, like I said, I think his striking technique's a little bit better, so I think Yancey's going to win by decision or TKO. Next is Charles Rosa versus Justin James, and to me, Justin James has got like 3 to 4 minutes of gas before he starts to fade really bad. And to me, Charles Rosa, he's been finished one time in his career, and that was against Shane Burgos, and that was because Burgos throws all those body shots, and he didn't even finish him until like the very end of the third. So to me, Charles Rosa, he's a super tough guy. He can take pretty much anybody's shots, and he can keep coming at guys. Like, he doesn't really get tired. It's just sometimes he gets outstruck or outgrappled. Justin James is probably the better striker for those first 3 or 4 minutes. I just don't think he finishes Rosa, and I think Rosa eventually takes him down the second or the third and wins by submission. Next is Julia Oliva versus Juliana Starenkolo. And to me, Juliana is pretty much just a jiu-jitsu chick, as where Oliva is a significantly better striker. I think unless Julia can take her down repeatedly and submit her, which I don't think she can. I don't think her wrestling's good enough. I think Oliva will keep this on the feet and just beat her up. I think eventually Oliva will win by knockout TKO, maybe in the second or third round. Next we got Marcin, I can't say his last name, versus Isaac Villanueva. And these are both really good strikers. I don't know if they're the greatest strikers ever, but they're fun strikers. I lean slightly towards Isaac. I think Isaac just has better one-punch knockout power. I think they're both kind of technical. Marcin's a little bit better technically. He could be able to outpoint him, but I just think eventually Isaac catches him and knocks him out. So I'm picking Isaac to win by second or third round knockout. Next we got Warley Alvarez versus Jeremiah Wells. And to me, Jeremiah, he's decent everywhere, but he's not great anywhere. I just think Warley can kind of beat him anywhere. I think Warley's the better overall striker and grappler. And I think wherever he kind of wants this fight to be is where it will be, and I think he wins by knockout or TKO. I just think Jeremiah is taking this fight on such short notice against a guy who's really good, and, it's just unfortunate his UFC debut is against someone this much better than him. Next is Shakata, I can't say this dude's name, versus Michael Prazeres. I just know he's Russian. The Russian guy is way better, in my opinion. I think that Michael Prazeres, at this point, he's like 40. He hasn't fought in like 2 or 3 years. And to me, his wrestling game is pretty much all he's got, with some submission ability. I think that at this point, the Russian guy is just going to be able to outpoint him and maybe even submit him or knock him out. I just think he's just the much younger, overall better fighter at this point. He's 13-0. He made his UFC debut and looked amazing, and I think he's going to win this fight in just as impressive a fashion. I think he's going to win by decision or knockout or TKO, so I'm picking the Russian guy. Next is Kennedy Njoku versus Danilo Marquez. And to me, Kennedy is definitely the much better striker, but I think Danilo is the much better grappler. And this really just comes down to, can Danilo get this to the ground? It's tough because I think Kennedy, his biggest problem is he doesn't pull the trigger enough, and I think that Danilo can take advantage of that. Because if Danilo was ever on top of Kennedy, I think we're going to see this be one-way traffic. Because on the feet, I think even though Kennedy's better, it's not like Danilo on the ground, right? Where like Danilo on the ground is just going to be all over you, as we're Kennedy on the feet. Even though he's the better striker, I don't think he lets it go enough for it to be so much danger that Danilo won't ever be afraid to close that space. And because of that, I think Danilo will get this to the ground eventually. And when he does, I think he's going to win by submission. So I'm picking Danilo to win by sub in like the second round, maybe the first. On the main card, the first fight is Renato Moicano versus Jai Herbert. And to me, I think that in terms of overall striking, Jai is probably the better striker, but I don't think it's by a ton. And then I think on the ground, Moicano's got a pretty solid advantage. And that's just what I see this fight being. I think the fight will be on the feet for a little bit. It'll be back and forth, but I think eventually Moicano will take this to the ground, and once he does, I think he's going to win by submission. I think Jai Herbert's a good fighter. I just think they kind of screwed him. I think they gave him 2 super hard fights right off the bat, You know, his UFC debut, he looked really good, but he still fought Francisco Trinaldo and lost. And now in his second fight, they're giving him Moicano, and it's like, you know, these guys who are ranked in the top 15, just outside the top 15 most of their career, and it's like, wow, that's such a fair two fight start. But yeah, I'm picking Moicano to win by second round sub. Next is Tim Means versus Nicholas Dalby, and this fight depends on if Tim Means can defend the takedowns. I think as long as he can defend the takedowns, he can win on the feet. I think he's the overall better striker. It's just Dalby's definitely the better overall grappler. It's just 100% can Tim Means stuff the takedowns. Because if he can, I say he wins by decision. And I'm leaning towards he probably practiced a lot on his takedown defense. So I'm going to pick Tim Means to win by decision. Next we got Andre Fili versus Daniel Pineda, and this just depends on how much Pineda trained for this fight, because I do think overall Pineda is a little bit better. Fili's probably a little bit faster fighter. I think in terms of overall grappling, Pineda's better, but Fili's the better wrestler. I don't think this fight will hit the ground that often. I think it's just going to be a kickboxing match for the most part, and like I said, this depends entirely on how much Pineda trained for this, because his last fight, he obviously didn't train super hard, and he gassed kind of bad. I think as long as he's in good shape, he can keep up with Fili, and I think he actually hits harder, and you know, even though Fili's a little bit faster, I'd say that overall striking technique's pretty even. That's what makes this fight really hard, is because I feel like if these guys are both fully prepared, it could go either way, and I'm leaning ever so slightly towards Pineda, just because I think he's a little bit better. Not a ton, but this is, like, in my opinion, one of the closest fights on the card, and this and, like, one or two other fights are the top dogs for fight of the night, but I'm picking Pineda ever so slightly. Next we got Ronnie Barsolas versus Timur Valiev. This fight's really tough because it's like Timur is so good, but so is Ronnie, and the one thing I favor is that Ronnie has way more finishing power. I feel like on the ground and on the feet, he has way more knockouts, way more submissions, as where Timur is a lot more of like a grindy style. I absolutely think Timur can win. I'm just saying, I think that Ronnie is a really good black belt. He's a really good striker, and he hits really, really hard. And because of that, I'm just leaning ever so slightly towards Ronnie, just because in terms of striking, it's close. I think Ronnie just hits harder. And in terms of the overall wrestling grappling, it's close, but I'm probably leaning slightly towards Timur in terms of the wrestling and his ability to grind. But like I said, I just think Ronnie's a little bit better everywhere, and I think he might eventually catch Timur and win by knockout or TKO. So I'm going to pick Ronnie. Next is Tanner Boser versus Ovince St. Preux, and my biggest thing is Ovince has not been looking great recently. It feels like he tends to slow a lot faster. Like, I remember he would slow a little bit, but he was always dangerous for all 3 rounds. Now it feels like if you can kind of get him into like the second and the third round, he's nowhere near as much of a threat. And I feel like that's what this fight is too. It's like, I think the longer Tanner Boser just makes this fight a fight, and you know what I mean, just does what he normally does, just make this like a kickboxing fight, I think it's going to favor him greatly, and I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes Ovince St. Preux in like the second or third round. I just think, like I said, my biggest thing with Ovince is his cardio has been looking worse and worse in these last few years, and I think this will be a fun kickboxing match for as long as it lasts, but like I said, come round 2, 3, I think Boser starts to take over and eventually wins by knockout TKO. Finally, on to the main event, we got Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov. My biggest thing is, if Volkov can stuff the takedowns, which I do think he will be able to because he's been working really hard at that, this fight will be really fun, and it'll be a really fun back-and-forth kickboxing match. My biggest thing is, I know that Volkov got knocked out by Derek Lewis, but he was dominating that fight right up until that happened. And we really haven't seen him get out-kickboxed so far, and that's what makes this fight so much fun, is it's like, pretty much all of his losses were just fights where he got out-grappled. He really hasn't been outstruck. And like I said, the Derek Lewis one barely counts because it's like, Derek just caught with a huge shot right at the end. Other than that, like, that fight was super in his favor. So, to me, it's like, I think Gane is not really, like, he does have one-punch knockout power, but he's more like Volkov, where Volkov is also not a one-punch knockout guy. They're both kind of like volume strikers that slowly beat each other up. And that's what makes this fight so much fun, is because, like, they both can keep a high pace. It's really just, as long as Volkov can stuff the takedowns, I think this fight could be, this is my pick for fight of the night, because they can both keep a high pace. I'm leaning ever so slightly towards Volkov just because I think the reach advantage is going to help him out a lot. He uses his reach really well, and I think that's going to cause problems for Gane, because Gane likes to, I mean, they both fight long, because Gane likes to throw a lot of kicks to set everything up, as where Volkov, you know, he does too, but he does use really long strikes. They both like to fight kind of long. And I think that's something that will also help Volkov with the wrestling, because they both like to fight so long. It'll make it that much harder for Gane to get the takedowns. But either way, I'm leaning ever slightly towards Volkov, just because I do think he has more finishing power. And until I see him kind of straight up lose a kickboxing match, I think he's probably the best overall striker in the UFC right now. I mean, you can argue that Ngannou has more like one-punch knockout power, but I'm talking like for a 5-round duration of a fight. I think Volkov's the best at heavyweight. And because of that, I'm leaning towards Volkov to win by decision or maybe a late TKO. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Click and subscribe.